Hello, hello, hi.
Hello. Hello, Aditya. Nice to see you here.
Hey, hey
Yeah.
Vedant.
Yeah. So, hello, everyone. I hope you are excited for the session. So, here we have Aditya with us. He is a DevRel engineer at Upright. He's MLH coach. I'm sure you all have heard about him. He's famous everywhere. So he's about to share his journey and his views onto our topic for today's session. That is SDE DevRel and CPM. So you guys must be wondering what differences these different roles have, and all. So let's get started about it. And so directly, Aditya, can you tell me about what are these roles? What is SD? What is DevRel? And what is Community Program Manager CPM?
Sure. I can get to that. Firstly, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. Um, I'm Aditya. I'm a DevRel engineer here at Upright. I've been around communities for a while, so that's kind of helped me get exposure to a variety of these roles because at some point or the other, I've had the opportunity to operate within community management, software development, as well as now DevRel. So far, through internships, through voluntary roles, and in a lot of different places. So I think, okay, so when I kind of talk about these three spaces, software development engineers, that's SDE, community program managers and CPMs, or developer relations, DevRel, these three spaces are interlaced in a lot of ways, uh, in the sense that, all three of them are heavily involved in enabling the growth, the adoption, the usage of a certain technology. Now, software developers, software development engineers, are the ones building the product. I guess it's still something that's probably, a lot more of you may have gotten exposed to or may have heard of, right? It tends to be at least a more accessible opportunity, is what I will say. Community program managers or community managers tend to be the folks who are managing communities, audiences around a certain product, ensuring that the people building with these products have a place where they can interact, where they can engage, and that this place is constantly buzzing and growing. So here we've got the person building the product, and the second, the person handling the community, right? The bridge between these is DevRel. Um, DevRel ensures that we have a constant communication, information flow between the community and the builder. That there are feedback loops present. That there is constant developer education. That there is constant awareness around a product. So we've got SDs and we've got CPMs, and their spaces, the software and the community, and the bridge between those is DevRel. So that's probably the easiest way to understand the distinction between these three.
Mhm. Okay. So who can be a DevRel? Like, can I be a DevRel, or what things do I need to be a DevRel?
Great question. I think, in my opinion, anyone who wants to kind of get there can become a part of the DevRel space. Because the fact is that as a space of its own, you don't need to do the job to fulfill the role. Um,
Right.
when it comes to what it needs, typically you should be someone, at least, okay, if I talk in context of Apprite, for example, since I'm at Apprite, so as someone who's a part of DevRel, our team there, I should be someone who understands what Apprite is, the APIs we have, how people can build with it, right? And at the same time, I should be someone who can maintain regular communication, someone who can ensure that you know that developers are able to understand, there is enough content around. whether it's written or video, that's a separate matter, but someone who can create content, ensuring that, at the end of the day, there is a constant communication flow. So for that, as far as skills go, you should be someone who can build, and you should be someone who can communicate. How you communicate, of course, is a different matter, whether it's written, video. That's also something that kind of changes and evolves based on requirements of an organization or a product. But the most basic way to kind of define that would be someone who can build and someone who can communicate.
Okay,
And I
okay. So
think a lot of us can do that, in my opinion. And
yeah,
it's probably just down to how much we want to exercise that side, right?
right, right. So, to what extent do we need technical expertise into particular domain? Like, do we need to be a master in order to be a DevRel, or do we? Is it fine if we just know the basic concepts and all?
It comes down to the requirements of the product again, because okay, so like for example, I am, maybe let's say, a front end or a back end developer, right? Now I'm at app, right? It's a back end of the service. If I'm someone who can understand how to build with the product, consume APIs, uh, you know understand how information flow on the internet, like, with formats like REST, and if I understand how that stuff works, for
Mm-hmm.
example,
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm gonna have enough technical expertise to build with the product and help someone else who might have problems. At the same time, being someone who engineers, if I understand how to read error codes, for example, how to look through code to figure out where things are going on, how things work, um, I should be able to manage this, right? Because it'll help me understand
Mm-hmm.
how these APIs are functioning, how the SDKs are working. So
Mm-hmm.
a general sense of software engineering, is going to help a lot there. And it also comes down to how much you're in practice, right? Because I might be doing these for the first time and I could manage these a lot if I've been doing this frequently. And maybe it's a
Right.
different matter if I kind of don't build for a long time. So it comes to much down to how much you're regularly practicing these. Now,
Got it.
this can vary again to with other organizations. So for example, I'm going to take this example because I've kind of seen this in the past, and like, one example I have in mind is Gina AI. Right now, that's a
Mm-hmm.
neural that
Yep.
has an AI based, I guess, neural search engine.
Right.
Forgive me if I'm wrong, but for example, if, like, the sort of expertise or the sort of understanding of the underlying product, it may require a very different learning curve, right? It may require a different amount of experience with those platforms or technologies, just because of the complexities of the product. So
Right.
it really comes down to how you treat. And here, for example, now I say complex with AI because I don't understand AI. For
Mm-hmm.
someone else, that might be the case with, you know front end development. Someone might not understand the intricacies on that front of how information flow on the internet works. So
Mm-hmm.
it really comes down to your, what you're interested in, what you've worked on. And for that matter, I think a generalist, at least with, again, if it's a general API sort of product, a generalist who can kind of build with the product, who knows how to go through products and understand code, that should be
Mm-hmm.
good enough. I guess
Okay.
the best example is for you to just try and see and build a little with the product and see if you can actually build with the product on your own. If you're able to
Okay.
comfortably build software,
Mm-hmm.
debug issues that you face, you probably should be in a decent space to go.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah.
So, as you mentioned that you worked as DevRel engineer at App, right? So, can you share how you got into this and how your experience was till now?
Very interesting story of how I found Apparate's DevRel role. I saw the job posting on Twitter. uh, yeah, so I just kind of decided that, after about 1.5 years of kind of staying active with communities, with tech,
Mm-hmm.
building my own stuff, I thought, as a career, DevRel kind of gave me the right balance between dev and community. So I started looking for opportunities. I was just, I guess, in the right circles, following the right pages at the right time, because one page that I really like, DevRel jobs,
Mm-hmm.
they posted this opportunity. They had this around, and I had a look, and I really liked what Applied was trying to do. So I went ahead, I applied, and things went on from there. uh,
Okay.
that being said, I think, I had a really good time with the process. Things worked out,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been there for 5 months.
Mhm.
I've been there for 5 months as a part timer since I'm still in college. But the good news is that tomorrow I actually transition into becoming a full time employee at App, right? So, yay! So that I'm literally starting
Congratulations.
full time tomorrow. Thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how things
Yeah.
happened, and I've just had a really good time with our team and our product so far.
Okay. So, one query that, how much does, having the personal brand help into this? Like you are already famous, right? So, there are very much chances that you would get
Thank
accepted,
you,
right? But
thank you so
how
much.
is it? Is it for someone who has the passion but isn't much famous or doesn't have a big brand? So,
Okay, so I don't think a brand is a mandate for DevRel. Just saying, in my team, we don't segregate on the basis of that.
hmm,
When we look at brands, though, here's how we see it when we recruit. Right, at the end of the day, if you're active on a social platform, you've got certain following. More than anything, it's a validation for your content,
right.
that your content matters. You know, now whether that's follows on Twitter or likes or claps on your Medium article is a different matter altogether. But
Hmm.
if there is some form of validation around your content, that does help. And typically the one way to quantify that is likes, views, or subscribers slash followers, right?
Right.
So it's not that you cannot demonstrate skill or expertise without following. You can very much do that, and at least I can't say for every organization, at least for us,
Hmm.
we try to evaluate on our own, because likes and followers can also sometimes be false counts, right? They may not always
Right.
be a perfect endorsement of skill. So we look at
Perfect. Right.
that anyway, but it does act as a validation for us. Just that being said, it's a plus in the corner. Not having that isn't a minus. So
Okay.
yeah, it's not gonna hurt you to not have a big brand.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
it's not gonna
okay.
hurt.
Yeah. So, what are normally the things that are asked in the interview process for a DevRel? Not asking what I
So
was asked in Upright, just in general.
in general, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I can talk about it in general.
Yep.
So let's let's talk about the different fronts that DevRel covers, because that
Mm-hmm.
might probably give you a little more insight into
Mm-hmm.
um, you know what might be asked. Now,
Yep.
there are a few different fronts that DevRel tends to cover. One, of course, is some sense of software or application development, because you need,
Yeah.
it's Dev and Rel. They
Right.
both are important. So Dev
As the
is
name
a
suggests,
company,
yes.
yeah. So um, some sense of Dev is there. Secondly, community, that becomes a
Right.
front. Third, content, as I mentioned, communication, right? So content becomes a front, and beyond that, it can really vary from organization to organization depending on the organization's own needs. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so typical questions would include, um, just talk about some expertise with the dev stack, or with the relevant technologies. Like for example, if it's a product like AppWrite, and when we're talking about APIs, you can understand that concepts around APIs, basic software development, oops, that sort of stuff is going to come into play.
Right.
And
Right.
I mean, at least for us, what we do is we take your GitHub beforehand. So chances are other organizations are looking at that in a similar manner, where they're
Right.
looking at your portfolio or your projects and expecting, that's a way to judge. Secondly, documentation practices, good content practices, content bad practices. That's a big point that a lot of people don't realize.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of this, of course, will be opinionated as well, rather than being fully objective,
Mm-hmm.
because DevRel is such a nascent space, and because it varies from organization to organization. There's going to be, you're going to see that, um, more than just a hard objective fact. It's going to be more opinionated than a lot of other spaces.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that you're going to have just one single
Right.
um,
Right.
answer to a dry run. So
Right. Right.
just for example,
Yes.
then it comes down to understanding community members, community organizing. Those are fronts that can be touched upon. And
Mm-hmm.
another side of this is that it also comes down to your own individual expertises that might see a difference of focus, right? So if I'm, for example, an active community organizer, that might be a front I'm interviewed more on. If I'm more of a writer, that might be a front that receives more focus. Because difference in expertise is also something that comes into play, because we want to make sure, like, that at least with companies, they want to make sure that they're hiring and they're looking for the best fit there. So, and they're trying to understand where you're great, to understand where you can impact those organizations. So it comes down to how you express your expertise as well, that comes into play. But yeah, that being said, development experience, content and documentation practices, and community, those are three that you would typically see in any scenario, in most, because even though DevRel necessities change from organization to organization, some basic skills would remain, right? So the most basic or fundamental skills kind of revolve in these broad spaces. Now, beyond that, depending on an organization, there might be focus on privacy of data, metricization, those sort of fronts that could come into play as well, right? So it then just kind of becomes more organization specific than anything.
Right, right. Okay. So when we come to the term organization, right? So we have
Mhm.
DevRel openings in MNCs like, Microsoft and all, whereas we
Mhm.
also have those in startups. So what
Yeah,
differences can one expect while working into these two different scenarios?
it's the same sort of difference you would probably find in a software development team in one of these,
Hmm.
because one is larger and the other is smaller.
Okay.
Autonomy,
Yep.
responsibility, accountability, pace. It's I mean, those differences are more just differences around how the difference of how a startup would operate versus how an MNC would operate. That's, I mean,
Right.
I see those differences translating more than anything.
Hmm.
Beyond that,
Okay.
though, it really kind of comes down to that. Anything else is probably a byproduct of that.
Okay. Okay. I got it. So anything specific that we learn during engineering that we should, really focus upon in case someone is like, I want to be DevRel, then I need this subject strong? Or does it depend on to product, as you mentioned?
It comes down to the necessary skills of a product again, because, like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
for example, I AppRed worked out for me, because I've been a backend developer for the longest time. I'm kind of learning more about front end now. So that's a space where APIs have been my space. Had it been an ML or an AI based product, something like GNI, for example, I would never have made it through the first. So it's because it's just I don't understand those technologies at their core, right?
Right.
Because my preferences, my expertise, my comfort space is somewhere else. So it kind of comes down to, again, what a product needs. And I will say that a lot of this is experiential. So while I can't say that coursework is going to impact you, chances are that if you've kind of volunteered around, if you've done stuff with your clubs, those are going to
Mm-hmm.
become a sort of a base for you to kind of build on, with your community experiences and so on and so forth. And that stuff can definitely help. But it comes
Okay.
down to skills at the end of the day.
Right. Makes sense. Okay. So let's consider, my case. Like today, I'm a software developer, and I wish to move into DevRel domain. So yeah, I have experience working in community, but that wasn't kind of a full time thing, and I want to switch to DevRel domain, right? So fine, I have the skills and all, but is it good for me? Like I want to work here, but it's like there's a risk that I might not be again get back to development from DevRel, right? Is that possible to get from DevRel to development in case I feel that no, that is not the right one for me?
Um, Honestly, I've seen people make those switches. So yeah, it's very much possible.
Mm-hmm.
I guess beyond that, it comes down to what organizations look for, how open they are to
Mm-hmm.
those changes. Because some organizations will be more open to those, some organizations maybe not as much.
Okay.
It also comes down to how conventionally these roles are seen in different places, right? Because I know for a fact in India it becomes a little tougher at times.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen people outside in the US and all transition from such amazing different backgrounds. And it's not
Yeah.
that it's not happening here, but we're only starting to open up to these now. So there's going to be some differences based on, you know, social aspects and cultural aspects of different countries as well that come into play. But that being said, it is possible. It just the only thing you have to look at is how do you validate your experience there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, one good way could be open source, which is anyway open to all. There's a lot of other different fronts. Freelance could be another front that where that could help you get a footing
Mm-hmm.
back. So it really comes down to what change you want, what path you're willing to go about it, how willing your target organizations are to accept you. So there's a lot of different factors there, but in general, the change is very much possible, even if not easy.
Okay. Okay. So, well, like some years ago, DevRel wasn't much of a trending role that was there, right? Like there wasn't any DevRel department in most of the companies and startups, but we can see this position has been emerging suddenly and at a very high pace, and is one of the most respected yet one of the most cool roles that one wishes to work on. So, what do you think? How this happened and what made companies understand the importance of this role?
So, that's a really great point. And in all honesty, it kind of comes down to how this entire industry and how the entire world is kind of growing. Because 10 years ago, the world wasn't as tech enabled as today, right?
Mhm,
Let's think about some of our, let's talk about the sort of companies we have. I'm going to kind of share two different types of companies.
mhm,
One group is developer first companies, which are kind of catering directly to developers, right? The second group would be developer plus countries, which cater to businesses or consumers, but also to developers. So, like, the first category would have organizations like Twilio, Auto, MongoDB, all of these. The second would have your Microsoft, Google, Amazon, and more. Let's think about how many of these existed 10 years ago versus how many of these exist today. It comes down to how tech enabled the world is right now, how we're seeing the usage of tech grow, how we're seeing the necessity for developers grow, because
mhm,
we have products and organizations that are willing to cater to these. So it's only because we have these organizations willing to cater that the demand for those bridges has started arising, right? Because if suppose you have five companies today that need someone to bridge, you're going to have five roles open. What
mhm.
happens when that changes to 50? Suddenly you've got a larger demand, right?
Right, right.
So it's
Makes sense.
because we've got more of those companies that are trying to cater to developers that we now have a larger need for DevRel. So
Hmm.
that's the big change. And yeah, it's only going to increase right now because we're seeing more and more companies catering to developers. That number is not going down at the moment. Startups have definitely made a big impact on that, because a lot of developer focused organizations are coming out of startups, right, versus just established corporations. We're seeing newer organizations try to cater that. So the startup boom, at least the tech startup boom, has definitely impacted DevRel hiring.
Mhm.
And I do foresee that it's going to grow at least for a while.
Okay. So, would you say the same for India? Like, how will be the growth of DevRel industry in India? Will it be the same? Will it change or up, down, what? Or has it started in India? Because, I guess
Yeah,
Apred is an Indian company. Rather, all of my
yeah,
friends who work
we're
at
not.
DevRel, they
Yeah.
are not Indian. They don't work at Indian companies. So, what do you think of that role in India?
Sava Labs is recruiting in India. That's an Indian startup for you,
Yeah, yeah, right, right.
right?
Yes.
And yeah, just saying, as we see more and more community focused roles grow, as we find more tech products coming around, we're gonna see more roles around developer relations, advocacy, evangelism around these communities as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the more India becomes viable for tech communities, the more it will become viable for DevRel. And that is a change that's happening today.
Mm-hmm. Right,
So we
right,
are seeing examples going to come out. It's not that Microsoft doesn't have DevRel in India, right?
right.
Microsoft has those people. Elastic has DevRel in India. You've got a MongoDB office literally in Gurgaon, which has
Mm-hmm.
folks around DevRel. I
Right.
believe, I think at least. So you're gonna see bigger corporations and kind of come up with those. Google has some DevRel folks around here. I know that they've got DevRel engineers for Android, definitely. And those are just a few examples off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
but it's gonna grow, it's gonna increase, and we're gonna see more and more folks uh, get invested in, because once again, India's become a really cool spot for the growth of tech startups and developer focused organizations as well, right? It's been seeing so many new products come up in recent times, and those, it doesn't just have to be developer first companies, developer plus companies also need those. Just
Mm-hmm.
for example, let's talk about Zeta or DirectEye.
Director, yeah.
They had a developer advocate role open. I know because one of the recruiters had reached out to me a while back.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Okay.
I already joined AppRite, so I definitely didn't go forward there. But we're seeing unicorns come up with these as well.
Right, right. Yep.
Goldman Sachs has folks around DevRel. They were looking for folks around DevRel here.
Mm.
So that's gonna increase. That's not going down, and
Right,
you're gonna
right.
see those in a lot of places.
Exactly. Even I read at a place, it's like some years ago there was a trend of having project managers and all because more and more projects were coming. Now, with
Yeah.
time the projects have developed. It's the next step of the dominoes to roll up, the DevRel industry, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are, a few doubts in the chat as well. Like, Sudhir has asked, what's the difference between an ambassador and a DevRel?
Nice. So first of all, good question. Secondly, an ambassador can also do DevRel, by the way. That doesn't have to be a distinction. The only difference here is that one might be employed by a company and the other might not be an employee but a volunteer. But it isn't that the
Mm-hmm.
ambassador doesn't support the DevRel activities. They're very much a part of those initiatives. They support the advocacy or evangelism initiatives for an organization typically.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So
Okay.
that doesn't have, they are a part of what the DevRel team is trying to achieve. It's just they might not be an employee.
Okay. So, is DevRel and developer
I
advocate
just
same?
kind of want to add back, sorry, I just want to add to that. Again, it comes down to the companies as well. Some might need ambassadors for marketing, some might need ambassadors for DevRel, some might need ambassadors for community. It really comes down to what the community is all about, and and what the company is all about and what they need. So look through
Yep.
that. That should probably give you a good idea.
Good. I also think your question is answered. Another question by Sudhir. So, is DevRel and developer advocate same, or are there any differences?
So I would say advocacy is a subset of developer relation. Like, it comes within the DevRel umbrella. It is a part of DevRel, because
Mm-hmm.
DevRel is a much larger space talking about, interaction and engagement between developers of a product and the community around it. Advocacy is one way to go about it. And, it talks about, well, advocates are essentially the voice of the community and the developer to the company. So that's how I
Okay.
kind of define and I see it. So that's
Mm-hmm.
one side and one facet of DevRel, just as there might be some other ones like evangelists or community managers or technical writers or
Right.
developer marketers. So there's a few different fronts there.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So suppose there's someone who is an experienced developer, maybe senior software engineer or something.
Mhm.
So is that role quite similar to being like can that person directly shift to being a senior developer advocate or head of DevRel or something like that?
If they've been voluntarily working, helping out DevRel initiatives, they've got the necessary skills and exposure,
Mm-hmm.
they could. That being said, I don't kind of recommend, if you're a senior software engineer, you've not got much active DevRel experience, I would rather say that, rather than jumping at the job, maybe look at something a little more mid-level, because one big pro is that you carry an amazing amount of development experience, which is always a huge benefit with DevRel. But that being said, the rel is just as important. So if you have the experience for that, why not go ahead, try for that. But if you don't, that's kind of something that you'll probably recognize on your own,
Mm-hmm.
rather than me discussing. Because
Right,
just as dev is an important component, so is the rel. It's
right,
both
right,
the product and the people. So,
right, right,
you're great at the product. It's probably time to get more experience with the people. If you already do, sure, go ahead, try for those.
right.
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense. Okay. So it's like many people they have they have tried applying it to at companies for DevRel positions and all. But they have observed, normally like everywhere, every company is like, I want 2 years experience, I want 3 years experience and all. The question that comes is, how will
Yeah.
people get this 2 or 3 years of experience?
Let's kind of break it down and understand what is meant by 2 years experience. Is it 2 years of
Mm-hmm.
software development experience? If yes, then that's your way to go about it. If it's 2 years of community building experience, that doesn't have to be through a company, right? That can be done voluntarily. My
Mm-hmm.
initiatives, I've been active in communities for over 2 years now. I've been actively running initiatives, building my own hackathons, managing communities around that.
Mm-hmm.
I have done 5 months of an internship around community development. So there are a lot of ways to kind of go about it. And I do want to ask if there is a lack of experience. If there's an expectation that there's 2 years of experience required, kind of try and think about what experience and what is being asked about, and just saying you can ask those questions from companies if you want. You can just directly ask them what front they want, because
Right.
for example, when you look at Microsoft, I think for their cloud advocate, they asked for, I guess, 2 to 3 years of developer experience and 1 year of um,
Advocacy experience.
community building. Yeah,
Okay.
community experience
Mm-hmm.
could be
Okay.
building, engagement, management, different tracks, but community experience was 1 year at least, right? So they kind of
Okay.
defined that for you. And
Okay.
there, in today's world, I'm not, again, it comes down to how different companies treat experience, but there are a lot of valid ways to build that. So for example, for me, I had done a lot of development through hackathons. I've worked on my own projects, worked on some larger
Mm-hmm.
stuff, and I knew how to present it well. So that worked out for me. Open source is a great front for you to kind of participate with larger organizations, contribute to larger projects, have your impact on products there, and publicly showcase your experience. So, those are two fronts aside from professional experience that you could consider. Freelance could be another third front that you could think about working with clients, because
Mm-hmm.
then you're effectively building for a company there in any case. So those are different fronts that you could actually look at to gain experience, even as a student, or in a circumstance where
Mm-hmm.
you might not professionally be a software engineer.
Right, right. Okay. So how do we find fine, okay, fine. So it's like I'm impressed, DevRel roles are amazing and I want to get in. But how do I get into, like, how do I find different opportunities for DevRel roles?
Look at AngelList, look at LinkedIn, look at Twitter. They're out there.
Got it.
People are sharing them,
Okay.
people are announcing them, because,
Right.
and aside from that, of course, there are some dedicated DevRel communities and spaces as well. Like, for example, like the page I mentioned, DevRel Jobs, they've got their own
Right.
community on Discord. You have
Mm-hmm.
another really cool DevRel focused community called Devocate. Please go check that
Mm-hmm.
out. So, there are a few different of the, communities and spaces, and you're probably going to find them once you start looking around on Twitter and all. Twitter is a great platform, I will say. It's been really good to a lot of people, good to me, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So I recommend keeping an eye out around Twitter. You can find a lot of opportunities off that.
Okay. Okay. So say for example, I found an opportunity. So how do I approach it? Like first of all, how should my resume be for that role?
So when you see a DevRel opportunity, you're gonna find some sort of experience requirements there, right? Someone who can build, someone who can create content, different fronts, right?
Right, right.
That should give an idea of what skills are required.
Mm-hmm.
After which
Got
you
it.
can kind of decide what experiences you have that validate those skills. And if you
Right.
don't have any experiences on those fronts, then it probably means that you now know where you need to get experience. So you would approach building a resume like another job. In all honesty, look at the skill requirements, look at the experience requirements. That should give you a good idea of how where to go forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So
Yeah.
any particular moment that you cherish the most being your DevRel, or maybe a community person?
I have had fun at a few different times. To be honest, I think as if I say professionally, I had a really good time with our Hacktoberfest initiatives. I one one specific event I always will remember was a panel that I got to host around building open source communities, where I was able to bring together three people who I really looked up to. So, we had Juan Pa from GitHub Education, we had Mike Swift, the co-founder, Major League Hacking, and we had Jen Looper, who's a senior cloud advocate from Microsoft. And I think that was one of the most wonderful panels I've had the opportunity to host. Definitely something I um, always will cherish, at least on the professional front, because that was a
Mhm.
part of our Hacktoberfest initiatives here at Apprite, and I had a really good time there. On a personal note, I guess Hackon, which is a hackathon that some of my friends and I co-organized, that was an
Mhm.
initiative that we had a really good time. Our second edition last year went really big. We had almost 8,300. We had 8,298 registrants, and big numbers.
Yeah.
And yeah, we had a really good time there, and some amazing work came out. So that's one thing, I guess, on a more independent or a more personal note. That those are two initiatives I will always cherish. Both of those.
Okay, that's really inspiring.
I will say one
So,
thing to
mhm.
these will probably change over the next few months, the next few years, and then they can change. And that's general advice for anyone here. You might have great moments in the past, don't stay locked to them. There's good stuff that can happen and better stuff that can happen. So
Right,
yeah, I'm hoping for better stuff to happen. Not because these weren't great enough, but because why why not more? Why can't
right,
things be better?
exactly. Right,
Yeah.
right. Why should be happy with what we have? There's always
And when you can be
something big
happy,
to
or why
achieve.
not? Sure,
Yeah,
you, something great happened, and that's always gonna be awesome. And something greater can always happen, though, right? We keep
right,
moving
right, right.
forward. So yeah, I'm hoping for better stuff.
Yes. Okay, okay. So, uh, people who, other companies who understood the value of DevRel, they have adopted it. What message would you like to share to those companies who haven't adopted it yet?
Um, I guess when it comes to companies who haven't adopted that, it comes down to their needs and requirements.
Mhm.
And starting DevRel can kind of be scary because yes, it's not a space that every organization understands as well. What I will
Right,
say
right.
is that if you have a product catering to developers, it's probably a good idea to start evaluating, you know, communication gaps between your
Mm-hmm.
organization and the developer, because it's very easy for that to happen, especially for smaller teams. With larger organizations, you might just have a lot of people who can kind of hop in on that. Smaller teams, maybe not so much. That it's just valid, right? You could just have problems there. And if you think there are gaps, it might be time to start considering a need for DevRel. But that being said, don't follow the fad. Please,
Right.
only if you actually need DevRel, because if you don't need DevRel and you bring someone on, it has the potential to actually ruin their careers as well. So it is, of course, a mutual responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
Okay.
evaluate your needs. If DevRel is necessary, great. If not, please don't force the role.
Right,
Yeah,
right. Okay. So, any message to our amazing people who have been listening to us patiently?
just keep experimenting and keep learning. I will say I recently wrote an article around what is DevRel. If you're interested in that, let me share the link here in the chat, and if we can send it out to the audience. I think it's an I've kind of worked. It's a guide from my experiences. So I'm just kind of testing the link for me. If
Mm-hmm.
this is the one, I've sent it to the team here, and if we can kind of send it out, it would probably be really cool.
Yep. Okay.
I see it's there. Thank you. So yeah,
Yep.
this article is just something that I kind of came up with from my experiences in DevRel, from how I've observed it. It has a little roadmap from that I kind of followed with my journey. So it could be a good guide for some people at least to understand what DevRel is and how to get started there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So, guys, if you have any questions, now is the best time to put it in the chat section. And the blog will obviously cover almost all of your queries. Still, if you have any more queries, you can definitely uh, DM Aditya on his LinkedIn or Twitter. Yep. So, are there any questions?
Even if not, I am available right here. Um, that's my Twitter handle. So
Yeah.
you can always reach out to me there as well. That's a good platform for me for you to reach out to me if need be.
Mhm. Um,
Yeah.
cool. Then anything else that you wish to share that you think that must have been discussed here but isn't yet covered?
I think we covered a lot of good stuff, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
good points. And I'll just say that, there are a lot of reasons to do DevRel and a lot not to. The most important one
Mm-hmm.
being is that you shouldn't rush into it just because you see it as, you know, the next, it's not that you'll enter DevRel and become a big brand or something. There are a lot of depths to it, there are a lot of intricacies to it. So please be sure that you actually understand and enjoy, even if not fully understand, even if it's partially, at least enjoy the space before kind of jumping into it. Because the fact is, yeah, we're all still kind of trying to understand how this is going to grow. It's an open
Right.
question for a lot of us, but you have to understand whether this consumes your mental space or actually improves and elevates it.
Okay.
And
Okay.
it's only then that you should take a decision to jump into this professionally, because you can't do this voluntarily without doing this as a job and get a taste of it. But kind of
Right.
don't just rush into it just because you might see your friend or your peer otherwise kind of doing it. Think about whether you want this
Mm-hmm.
really or not.
Okay. Okay. So we saw the sweeter part of DevRel. So what can be the bitter part? Is there any bitter part that might be possible? Maybe if someone doesn't much resonate with the DevRel role and he
I guess better
just
for
out of the
who is the
fans.
question, right? So, for example, for me, I kind of love working with communities. I love spending my time. Sometimes it takes time beyond work hours
Mm-hmm.
as well, right? But I don't mind that. I enjoy that.
Right. Right.
Um,
Okay.
you know,
So
for some people, it might consume them.
right. Right. So basically
Still,
it lands on to the point whether we if we do the work that we love, then it is no more a work. That thing, right?
yeah, it's really dependent on that. And you know, secondly, yeah, one thing I will say is DevRel is not just event management. There is far more to it.
Mm-hmm.
The DevRel is not just public speaking. There is far more to it. Those are components of DevRel. So please don't think of DevRel as one small aspect of it. There is more to
Mm-hmm.
DevRel than just these individual aspects.
Right. Right. Okay. One final question by Jay. So, if we need to simplify DevRel for first year student, what will be the
Mhm.
first thing that one should keep in mind in order to explain that easily and correctly?
I like to use the bridge example that I talked about. And if you check out the article that's sent, it's actually explained there as well. Because, for someone in the first year, they might understand what a product is. They might understand someone who's building with a product and maybe not more.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I kind of like to use my bridge example, because that gives a relatively more easy way to understand DevRel than just kind of talking about how they're involved creating content and these flows and that. This is going to confuse people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Seeing them as a bridge between a company and developers using that company's products, that might be a good way to understand that.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's there. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're explaining that trick for DevRel, keep things as simple as possible. Don't try to decrease complexities from your communication in your words. That's
Right.
the best way to kind of get messages across.
Yep. Maybe what we can use the shortest definition is the bridge thing that you told, the bridge between community and the product. That
It's
explains
the
it.
way to understand. With a bridge, what are you going to see? Bridges are what? Two-way
Right.
flow.
Right. Right.
You
Right.
have cars going from here, cars going from there. So that's the same thing with information, right? Information flow is
Right.
what it's enabling. So bridges kind of become a good way to
Mm-hmm.
talk about that.
Right. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess there aren't any more questions in the chat, so I'll shoot a question from my personal side as well. So there are communities who would like who organize hackathons and all, but they are in general, like there are people who have got experience in community building. But when you come on to DevRel, it is more product oriented, where we develop a community about the product, right? Revolving the product, right? So what difference in the task or the objectives of that role would be?
Um, so with the difference between building a brand community or and building an independent community is the sort of impact and the growth you want to achieve, because um, at the end of the day, my aim with a brand community is to ensure that people who are consuming my product are happy, and
Mm-hmm.
in return, my the community around my product is constantly growing. So aside from the impact I make, it
Mm-hmm.
is necessary for me to be able to metricize and quantify its growth, to understand, understand the impact of that on my product. Now with an independent community, some of those metrics might remain, some might not, right? Because as an
Makes
independent
sense.
community, you may not have the force of understanding future impact on the product.
Right.
That could be a thing there, right? You might be a little more relaxed that I don't want a certain more than a certain size. I just want to work with. I have a certain amount of people. I want to work with them, and I want to make sure that they're having the best time possible. So that might not be something that you have to worry about. With the brand
Mm-hmm.
community, we at least for us, we want to make sure, because again, it comes down to an organization's need, how they perceive growth, where they need growth, right?
Yes.
So those come into play here as well.
Got it. Got it. That answers my question. So, yep, I think we don't have any more questions. So maybe we can wind this up.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good.
Cool.
Sure.
Cool. Cool. Yep. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining. I hope you enjoyed the session. If you had any more questions, reach out to Aditya. That's his Twitter handle.
Yeah.
So thanks, people.
Thank you so much for hanging around. And yeah, shout out to the Reskill team as well. There's been some fun stuff happening. I know I came up here sometime back as well to talk a little about Azure functions. And
Mhm.
I know there's been some really good content coming out around. So hang around and make sure you're following that content. It's good stuff for sure.
Yep. 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 And if you want to stay tuned with further sessions, don't forget to subscribe the channel and do join our Discord as well. Yep. Thanks
Yeah,
everyone.
I'm around there as well, by the way. I believe I'm there anyway. So if you want to reach out, you can do that there too if you want.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Cool.
Yep. Sure. Right then. I
Yep.
guess. See you all.
Thanks, Aditya. Yeah. Bye bye. Bye bye.
Bye.